Hello, everyone. I'm Scott Kober. I am the co-coordinator of CME Palooza Fall, and I would like to welcome everyone to our lunchtime panel sponsored by Genentech entitled Incorporating Learning Systems and Quality Improvement into Continuing Medical Education. This session is being moderated by Scott Weber from MedIQ, who I will bring in just a moment. So first of all, I'd like to thank all of our sponsors of CME Palooza Fall. Certainly Genentech as the gold sponsor of the event and the sponsor of this specific lunchtime panel. Our silver sponsors, iMedx and MedPage Today. Our bronze sponsors, CMEology, Educational Measures, Highmark CE, Impact Education, Mededicus, Red Med Ed, and Viva City. So for those folks who are watching this live, there are 3 ways to ask questions during this session. If you're watching in the Google Plus window, there is a question and answer app you can use to submit your questions. You can use Twitter using the hashtag CMEPalooza, or you could also use the MedPage Today text line to send in a question. And the number for that is on your screen. It is 267-6660-CME. So as far as speaker disclosure, so the opinions, discussions, and conclusions expressed by our panelists are their own and do not represent an endorsement by or position of their employer, its parent, or affiliates. So with that, initially, I'm going to turn this over to John Ruggiero. John is the Senior Medical Education Manager in the iMed department at Genentech, and John's going to help to kind of put some initial context behind this session. So John, go ahead.
Sure, Scott. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be part of this and for the invitation to even be able to support such an event. We're happy to be part of something that's so innovative and really getting such a great reputation within our industry. Just to give you some context behind what this session is about, which Scott Weber will be managing as a matter of fact. In July 2014, Genentech, through an educational outcomes week, during the analysis of outcomes that providers have provided to us, we decided to convene a panel of providers who received support from Genentech for quality improvement focused educational grants. The purpose was really for them to teach us within the medical education and research grants team about the context of quality improvement. That was a very humbling experience to be able to say, you providers with the experience here need to tell us supporters about what is important about quality improvement and what we should know and be aware of as we continue to receive grants like this. It really was surrounding the ideas of why should educational providers and supporters be interested about the subject, interested about the framework of quality improvement, but it also went into determining whether or not our interprofessional clinical audiences are prepared or equipped to have the information and necessary tools possible to go into the world of quality improvement through education, what kind of quality measures were needed to be used for these kinds of events, as well as how do we address scalability in time. So the conversations provided us with great insight. And I'd like to give specific kudos, actually, to Scott Weber and also Chris Hoffman from Medscape, who was there that day, who suggested that the industry needed more forums like this, that we needed to make more opportunities available to everyone in the educational industry so that we could continue to have these kinds of discussions, hence the session today. So I'm going to actually hand it over to Scott and to the panel. I am not going to be participating as strongly as the rest of the panel, but really looking forward to hearing the conversations. So Scott, back to you.
John, thanks so much, and again, thanks for your support for this initiative. And I want to thank Scott Kober and Derek for their work with CME Palooza. Just some full disclosure here around this presentation today. As moderator, I think it's important that everybody knows I'm really passionate about the work that we do in the CE enterprise every day. When I say we, it is the collective we, everybody listening and involved every day in educating healthcare providers in this country. And from my own standpoint, this is great to be a part of this and moderate this exceptional panel. You're going to hear some really great perspectives today around this whole issue of QI, and it provides some context, I think, before we get into some of the topics. I think is going to be important. So if you just took a snapshot right now of where we are with respect to quality improvement education and the relationship that it has with the CE enterprise, there are a lot of us that believe that and are really encouraged that there's never been a better opportunity for us to become engaged in this type of education where we're developing and delivering QI interventions to improve healthcare. Many of us believe that the incentives are finally coming online for healthcare providers to participate in these types of interventions, and that many believe that continuing education can actually become a valuable and vital tool to help drive and sustain cultural change, performance change within practices and systems, ultimately improving patient care. Many of us are very passionate about the work that the Alliance is doing with its 5-year strategic plan that includes this concept of the QIE roadmap, which is really just a natural evolution of the work that's being done in the CE enterprise, a channel, if you will, where we can use education as a tool to drive quality improvement and make transformations in quality improvement. And what we're really excited about is the fact that at the core of this intervention with the Alliance is this continuing professional development initiative where stakeholders in the CE enterprise will be able to get trained on how to develop and deliver this type of education. So we think that's going to have significant positive impact on the work that we do. I think we're also encouraged that our industry-supported partners like Genentech remain at the table and willing to fund innovations in quality improvement. And again, I think the relationship that we have in getting that funding and delivering quality outcomes is a tremendous opportunity for all of us. And again, I don't think there's ever been a better time for us to really, in the CE enterprise, demonstrate why we matter and the impact that we're having on healthcare in this country through the work that we do, and certainly working on some of these QI initiatives. So today's discussion is really to get insight from experts in the QI space who understand the space, who have delivered education and seen the outcomes, and ultimately to create a path forward that we can all work together successfully to improve healthcare through quality improvement education. And I want to do some intros real quick, and I'd like to start with Alex. We'll go around the panel. Alex, if you could just introduce yourself and your affiliation.
Sure. My name is Alex Jurisic. I am the Associate Dean for Continuing Medical Education in Indiana University School of Medicine. I wear a second hat as a Program Director of Medicine/Pediatrics at that same institution.
Catherine?
I'm Catherine Smith. I am the Vice President of Quality and Education at the Society of Hospital Medicine.
And Kathleen?
I'm Kathleen Morio. I'm President and CEO of Prime Education, Inc. in South Florida.
So, as John alluded to, we had this great panel discussion, this workshop at Genentech where a lot of folks came together. I do want to say thank you to Tom Sullivan and Jay Katz from Rockpoint who participated, also Chris and Caroline from Medscape and now Genentech. They were great partners at the table as we responded to the questions that took place there from John and his team and his colleagues. And what was fascinating is one of the questions that was asked in this workshop is a question that I think we all hear time and time again, and that is when we talk about quality improvement education, the question of why should education providers and commercial supporters be engaged in this type of work? Is this really the space that we ought to be in? And ultimately, what should our roles be? Kathleen, I wanted to get a response from you, and then we'll go around with the rest of the panel.
Sure, Scott. So, I'm thinking about your introduction, and I think you embodied all the key reasons why we need to be involved, even in your opening remarks, regarding the value that we can prove as providers and as supporters in what continuing medical education can do, in identifying the accountability that comes with quality improvement, and how do you measure accountability, and that's going to require a framework such as continuing education to do that. I mean, those are a couple of the points that you touched upon. And when I think about it, we actually debated that question at that workshop that Genentech first hosted back in July, and there were a lot of really strong and very amenable comments that came out of that. And I think what sticks in my mind is, we talked about how kind of the trains left the station. Quality improvement has been going on for a long time now through the IOM and others since the early 2000s. It really was given teeth with the Affordable Care Act, and it really behooves us, if we're going to stay current with the healthcare system and be able to impact what we can do to improve care for our clinicians, the care that they deliver, but ultimately for the patients who are the recipients of that care, we need to be engaged, and in doing so, we really will be able to prove our value. So anxious to hear what my other panelists think about that.
Alex, some thoughts from you from the Academic Medical Center perspective?
Well, sure. Scott, that's a really good point. I think this is an important question. When I think about what the skills of healthcare providers, physicians, and others need in the current environment of medicine, it is beyond just the content of what they need to know. So, for example, if I'm a pulmonary doctor and I need to care for sarcoid, it's not just knowing how to care for sarcoid, but how to improve the care that I provide for patients with sarcoidosis. So, in other words, the quote-unquote science of improvement is as important as the science of the medical content that each of the healthcare providers is delivering to his or her patients.
Catherine, from the work that you all are doing at the at SHM, you guys have been engaged in quality improvement initiatives for a long time. Come back to this whole point about the role that the CME community should be playing, the CE community should be playing in quality improvement education.
Sure. So I think it's interesting because here at SHM we have very, very frequent dialogues between our quality improvement department and our CME departments about where that overlap happens. So our quality improvement department really focuses on site-based interventions, and obviously our CME department, I think everybody here knows what they focus on. And I think the piece that's extremely important is sort of what CME brings to the table is the measurement piece and the concept of standardized measurement. I agree with what the other panelists have said, that just if you look at the sphere and environment of healthcare right now, that there's the intrinsic or the motivation related to improving patient experience and improving patient safety. But then there's also the extrinsic motivators that are, the government and the certifying boards and even the licensure boards related to integrating performance improvement and quality improvement in one's practice and demonstrating that. And I think on the CME side, because we've been demonstrating certain things in certain ways, speaking the language of the licensing boards, and in a lot of ways the language of the certifying boards, I think we can stand to assist our quality improvement colleagues in that dialogue.
I appreciate the response. I want to stay with you for a minute on this, Catherine. One of the questions that came out of the session at Genentech, and we hear this all the time, is that while it's great that the CE community is moving down this path of developing, delivering, collaborating in the quality improvement space, that still healthcare providers are not necessarily ready to make that step and to be engaged in these types of activities for a number of reasons. I wanted to get your perspective from your experience, if you believe that's true, and if so, what are things that we should be doing to help prep them for this transformation that's coming?
Sure. So I think, as with many questions, it's a really difficult question to answer because it is so different. I think the two areas where you can start to slice and dice it are generational, and specifically I mean when someone graduated from medical school or when they completed residency, and then also the site, the area in which they practice. So I think our newer generations of graduates and trainees are a little bit better equipped in terms of basic quality and patient safety training. And then I think obviously there are sites that everyone knows are the key sites, whether that's academic medical centers or in some cases larger ACO type practices or health systems that have quality and patient safety, both training and interventions, integrated in what they do every day. So I think what we at SHM, we follow the 80-20 rule when we're making assumptions about our members and constituents. So we assume that 80% of the people that we work with are not involved in quality improvement, or if they're involved, they have no idea that they're involved. They're checking a box every day for some reason, they're not sure. And then 20% are either involved, understand what they're doing, or are, in our sphere with hospitals, there are a lot of, key names and leaders in quality and patient safety. So that's the rule of thumb that we use. That's not a scientific rule. It's just when we're looking at programming, we think about that 80-20 and we approach the 80 different than we do the 20.
And Alex, from your vantage point, you touched on it earlier. What are you seeing? Do you see this generational, is from a participation or readiness standpoint? Do you see it as a generational issue, or do you see something else taking place?
I do think that generations are an important aspect of this, but I'll just put a little perspective to those generations. I completed my residency in the mid-90s, from 94 to 98. So I've been out in practice as a practicing clinician for some time now. But I never had quality improvement as a required part of my curriculum. I learned this on the fly myself. When we started teaching this to our residents in 2003, I considered it innovative. I'll use a term from the previous sessions earlier this morning. It was pretty innovative. I was pretty excited, got some cool presentations out of it at national meetings, et cetera, et cetera. It's now no longer required. Excuse me, it's now no longer innovative, it's required. And what I mean by that is the RRCs, the Residency Review Committees for the ACGME, at the graduate medical education level now require this for all residencies to have QI and patient safety training and education embedded within the overall curriculum for those training programs. And so how can it be innovative? It's required from every single person to have to do it. So I do think it's evolved, and I think the new generation understands it's important. You have to put it in a context that they can understand. So the term that I use when we teach it at that level, at the GME level, is experiential learning. You know, I can't give them a test and say, okay, what is the S in the PDSA cycle? Well, if they can say that that's study, so what? That doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean that they can, quote unquote, do QI. So I really think it's important to have experiential learning, and the fact that the new generations are now, we require it for them, and it really gives them a better understanding. It's just as another context, our institution just had a GME workshop yesterday, in fact, and one of the things they talked about was the CLEAR visit. So that stands for the clinical learning environment, and what happens at that realm is that the ACGME comes in and reviews how the institution, not at the level of the program, but the institution, the health system itself, how are they approaching all of this? And quality improvement and patient safety are two of the 6 key components of that. So this is not a fad. This is not a flavor of the month. This is here to stay, period.
It's such a great point, because it's funny that when you talk to people, sometimes people can get sort of polarized around this concept of quality improvement education because they reflect back on what they perceive to be the PI experience where maybe expectations weren't met. And so one of the things that I think in the CE enterprise that we have to be very, very cognizant of is that this is not a fad, that this is here to stay, it's evolving. But what I think is absolutely funny, and I'm glad Kathleen is here, is that Kathleen and Prime have been doing, you guys are doing QI when QI wasn't cool, 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Yep.
And so one of the things that we see, Kathleen, in the work that we do in this space is that when healthcare providers see their own data, that in and of itself is a motivator, and it inspires them to stay engaged and to complete these types of activities, and the ability to show them their own data of where improvement is taking place has really profound impact moving forward. Talk about, from your standpoint, the motivators that you've seen in your experience these last 20 years that gets providers engaged and completing these types of activities, and what they're doing with that data.
That's a really good question. So thinking all the way back to the early years, oftentimes it was because it was a system improvement issue. The system itself got dinged. Way back when it was only about HEDIS, for example, in a payer organization, and their HEDIS scores weren't good. The payer organization would then pay us to come in and conduct a quality improvement project to try to bring up the scores that ultimately is going to help the payer organization in their reimbursement. So, money, at the end of the day, was obviously the driver behind how it got funded. What was really difficult, and a lot that we had to overcome in the granular level, which is when we were dealing with the provider practices, is to help them understand that this was important for them, even though they really weren't necessarily going to be incentivized in the pocket, that we really could improve the quality of care delivered to the patient. So when they saw improvements in their data, which were a direct reflection of patient improvement in their diagnostic test and their ongoing care, then that was really where the rubber met the road, and they got excited about it. I think clinicians just inherently want to do the best by their patients. That's how, we as clinicians are driven to what we do every day anyway. So that was an interesting approach in the beginning, that we had to overcome that. What we've seen dramatically change since 2010, and certainly very much so in 2013 and 2014, has been that the incentive now is the direct expense to the practitioner office. So because of the PQRS measures, they've been incentivized to do better. Starting in 2015, they're going to be penalized. They're very concerned about this. They're concerned about how they're going to do this, and they're asking for tools in education. That's what CE can bring to the table. So we're really seeing this paradigm shift over time.
I appreciate it. Alex, I want to come back to you, and when you talk to a lot of the CE provider community, there's a question with so much emphasis right now being placed on quality improvement education. I think, and other panelists can weigh in on this, I think there are a lot of CE providers who are sort of processing this and saying, is this something that's for me in my organization? And I'm talking specifically about the MEC community that's trying to figure out what their role is going to be with respect to quality improvement. Obviously, from a hospital system practice standpoint, it's very clear what the role should be from that standpoint, and from a society standpoint as well. But I would like for you, if you could, for just a couple of minutes, talk about the value of collaboration and what you see the role of partners outside of academic medical centers, what role we can play in working with you to help you achieve quality improvement educational outcome goals.
So I think that's a great question. We talked earlier today, or at least I've listened to the presentations about the role of collaboration. IPE is a great example of that. You have to collaborate with people that are not just in your same specialty, people that have different backgrounds. So I think that collaboration is important. But gone are the days when the doctor had to set up their shingle and said, I am in practice. They were completely alone. They worked with one doc and one nurse maybe, and they had a cadre of patients that they cared for. Those days are, now we can say, fortunately or unfortunately, are gone. You need a team of people. Medicine is a team sport now. It really is. And I should probably say not just medicine, but healthcare is a team sport, probably a better way of doing it. So that collaborative piece is really an important aspect of what we do every day. In order for me to care for a patient in my primary care office, I need an army of people. I have a social worker who's there when I have patients with depression that I need help today. I need you to see this patient right now or within 30 minutes. And we have those opportunities in my office, which is an underserved practice. So we really need those tools and those collaborative opportunities. In terms of how you relate this to continuing education, the process is complex, and the providers of the future need to learn how to work well with others, and that means that the way that we teach them also needs to involve multiple partners. So I think that really becomes an important aspect of how we do it, and getting those partners together at the table. It's easier said than done. There's no doubt about it, because just to schedule a meeting might take a month, but you keep plugging away at it, and I think that you can really make it happen.
And Kathleen, talk about the collaboration partnerships. Give an example of sort of the characteristics of the best collaborative relationship between, let's say, academic medical centers, societies, and MECs, and others that provide services and technology to the CE enterprise. What's sort of a best practice, if you will, around in collaboration with respect to making QIE or QI transformation in a system?
Well, there's a lot of different ways that can be done, and I think a lot of it depends on, defining and then bringing the different expertises to the table, depending on what your study design is. So one clear-cut example would be that the academic medical center can provide the access to the patients and the patient data, as well as be able to look at existing data before you even begin and help identify through a deep needs assessment where those gaps are. Who are the low performers within the organization? What is it we're trying to achieve, and why is the gap there? The society, in a clear-cut way, can provide the expertise. They can provide the faculty, the recommendations for the expert faculty to assist with content development. They also can really tie together from a collaborative standpoint. They're used to doing a lot of collaborations. So they have best practices in that regard, and they certainly can assist with that. The study design, development of the IRB protocol, if there's an IRB protocol, etc. The MEC typically can bring bench strength. There are a lot of folks that are involved in the MEC. The MEC is comfortable and used to doing a lot of collaborative types of efforts, understands what the end goal is, has the systems in place for evaluation, for implementation, for promotion of the activities, and so that's something that the MEC can bring. And that's just 3 examples. Your collaborators could also be data management companies. It could be chart review companies, big data analysis, those types of things. I love Alex's analogy where he says that healthcare is now a team sport. And so we, as the providers of education, also have to make this a team sport.
And I think, and to that point also, it's one of the things that we don't really do a good job of in the CE enterprise is sharing best practices. And I think when we have success in developing and delivering these types of initiatives, it is a moral imperative, I think, that all of us be able to share those outcomes and that data and what are the best practices, how they worked, and perhaps where they didn't work, so that a rising tide raises all boats, right? And if we're able to get more information out to our colleagues about what success looks like and the mistakes that we make along the way, I think we're ultimately going to have a much better shot of truly making a difference in this. And Catherine, just from an SHM standpoint, I'd love to hear, anything come to mind as far as a success story that you have as a successful collaboration in the QIE space.
Sure.
That would be Catherine, yes.
Sure. I think we've used a couple of different models. I think the most successful model is working with academic medical centers. So, and I think both Kathleen and Alex hit on this, but the academic medical centers, obviously, or the community hospitals, have access to the patients and access to the patient data. I think in this case, for those of you who are more familiar with it, Boost is a project that SHM has worked on for years with a physician, a hospitalist named Mark Williams, and many, many others across the care team. So beyond hospitalists, beyond physicians. And we've been able to disseminate that to hundreds of hospitals nationally based on those partnerships. And actually, that Boost as a particular partnership is sort of multifaceted. So we've partnered with statewide health systems, we've partnered with academic medical centers, we've partnered with community hospitals. I think we've partnered with payers and others as well. So that's taking one particular model for improvement, which is a mentoring model. So SHM provides the expert mentors who are typically hospitalists, and those hospitalists work with the care team at a site or a state to affect the intervention.
So Scott, let me jump in with a couple of questions that we've gotten. I know people have kind of talked about a few of these issues, but so here's a question that just came over. So are there limitations to what can be accomplished within continuing health education when it comes to quality improvement? Aren't many of the necessary components best leveraged within the health systems or quality-focused organizations?
Kathleen, you want to take that one?
I did not get to hear
anyone who wants to.
I can take it, but Scott, I didn't get to hear the very end. There was a little bit of a drag there. So at the very last piece of that, what did you ask?
Sure. Aren't many of the necessary components best leveraged within the health system or quality-focused organizations?
Yes, I would say so. But when you think about, again, we don't want to make this too difficult. Quality improvement is, as I think John alluded to in his opening statement and Scott touched upon as well, people get hung up on it and think that it's this really ethereal thing and it's difficult to get your arms around it. And, a quality improvement project from a CME standpoint can be very fundamental. It really can be taking one instance of a patient improvement or a safety improvement issue and getting the team members together and then implementing a series of activities to be able to improve that, and of course measuring that before and after. Or it can be really quite complicated. And I know we're going to talk about that more when we talk about the implementation of programs and expectations, but to me, CE is just such a natural leverage in the quality improvement space because it really defines and embodies, from the standpoint, as I talked about earlier, the fact that we already know that we have to establish outcomes, we have to measure those outcomes, we're looking at accountability for improvement, we're looking at value. Those are part and parcel to what quality improvement is. So I hope I've answered that question.
Alex or Catherine, did you want to comment on the question at all?
Yeah, this is Alex. I completely agree with that. This is best described in a paper from the Annals of Internal Medicine from 2012, and the title of the article was Quality Improvement and Continuing Education, a Match Made in Heaven. It really is, and so it's a matter of our community stepping forward and working with the quality folks. Hopefully the door isn't closed when we go knocking on the doors of the quality people to try to say, how can we work together? And the goal is to have the door be open and say, come on in and help us. And I think the really key for the community is to make the case. Why is this important? I think that's going to be the critical step in making it successful.
Okay, and so the other question that came over is, what are some of the missing competencies among CME professionals that are needed to optimally interface with quality improvement professionals?
Catherine, you want to take that?
One thing that I've noticed in sort of facilitating dialogue between our quality improvement experts and our CME team is this concept of group versus individual. And I don't know if this is something that others have experienced in their spheres, but CME is really something that's targeted at the individual, the way that it's evaluated, the way that it's measured. Not always, obviously, but it's targeted towards licensure, which is an individual entity, and that there are ways in which there are some innovative CME providers who are thinking about group education and group outcomes, but quality improvement has to be about the group coming together and executing an outcome for the group. So it's less tied to the individual, and that's something that we've talked about a lot at SHM, sort of helping inform both sides, so not prioritizing either the individual or the group, but really working to think together about how we measure, how we target. I mean, just on the technological side, we are always trying to figure out with our technology partners, whether it's the CME side or the quality improvement side, how we cross those group versus individual lines.
Alex, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I'll just give you an example of how people can really work together and how the community can become involved. So I'm a member of the American Academy of Pediatrics, the AAP, and they've had some quality improvement modules, learning opportunities that work within one's practice called the EQUIP modules. That's EQUIP. And those used to cost money to the members of the society, plain and simple. This last year, they made it free. They realized that this was really important.
I'm sorry, that would be the 1232 train coming through right now. All aboard. Hope that's better. That we got cut off there. Alex, I'm sorry, did you finish your point?
Yeah. So just really that the society is working together to really make some of these educational modules for QI free for our members, which is really a wonderful opportunity.
And I think the other part of this, with respect to the competencies, and John, maybe it would be great maybe if you wanted to comment around this with the QIE roadmap that's being laid out by the Alliance. I mean, this is a big part of what the Alliance is trying to do is to create a standardized framework for continuing professional development to address some of these competencies. Yes.
I would think so, Scott. I think that we had a great opportunity by being introduced to Moore's level of outcomes, which is something that really replaced the gap that did not exist before in the CME industry, a way to foundationally measure specific endpoints to show that CME was effective in some type of way. I do think the time has come to enhance that model and to start thinking about different measurement points, different factors that would help all of those within this educational community consider what are the endpoints necessary to measure education today in today's healthcare reform world. So just very basically, I think it very much aligns to what everybody is saying here, as well as to what the QIE roadmap is, I think, eventually going to address.
Sure, I agree. What's interesting is that it came out of the session at Genentech, and I'm sure everybody on the call has heard this as well as the panelists, but for a while, for a long time, industry was kind enough to step up and support, from a funding standpoint, a lot of the early performance and quality improvement initiatives that were being developed and delivered in the CE enterprise. And again, there were levels of success. I think we learned a lot through that experience. But I also think that there was a lot of success, and that I think that we are a lot smarter now moving into this evolution of QI development. But one of the things that I think we have to be careful of is looking at it from sort of wearing a commercial supporter hat and being able to recognize when grant requests are coming in, are there key indicators, elements in that grant request that supporters should be looking for that can really give insight as to whether that this quality improvement initiative that they're being asked to fund can actually work, and if the partners at the table have the expertise and sort of a collaboration legacy, if you will, together to be able to make it work. And so I wanted to go around to the panelists and just get feedback on maybe, just a couple of key elements that you think the commercial support community should be looking for when reviewing quality improvement education grant requests. And Kathleen, I want to start with you, if you would, please.
Sure. Actually, this was a great point of discussion at the recent Alliance's AQS meeting, where we had supporters actually take the podium and talk about what they see as a best practice and what they see as areas of limitation. So I know there's a lot of discussion around this, and I would say there's so many, but one that comes immediately to mind is that a good grant really needs to outline the data that will be reviewed and the limitation of the data. I think that's all a part of setting expectations as well. Depending on where data is being drawn from, that's ultimately going to measure improvement in patient care from a QI standpoint. What are the limitations to what that data can show? And really having an understanding of how that data is going to be accessed, and then what that data will ultimately be able to deliver in terms of analysis. So that's one huge area of importance from a supporter standpoint, to ensure that the grant reflects that information as well as a strong understanding, because it would be a shame if you were to support something and assume that it's going to do a lot of things that maybe don't necessarily say it's going to do in the grant, but you're making leap of faith and setting your expectations on that. And quality improvement is a lot of wonderful things, but it's not the end-all wherewithal. It's not going to solve all issues in healthcare. So that would be one point, and I'll leave it open to my fellow panelists to come up with some more.
Catherine, some thoughts from you as far as grant submissions and elements that commercial supporters should be looking for that would give insight to whether that initiative could be successful?
Sure. I would echo pretty much verbatim what Kathleen said about the data piece. I think that tends to be the most challenging and also one of the most expensive elements. So I would agree completely with that. I think the other piece is that for a quality improvement project or program to be effective, there needs to be some sort of leadership training and change management and communication that's integrated into it. So that doesn't mean that every grant is going to have a full curriculum on leadership and change management. That's a whole other, a grant program that's probably equally as expensive, if not more, than the quality improvement intervention. But I think if a successful applicant would acknowledge that piece of it, so this is a systems-based change that we're trying to affect, and in order to do that, there does need to be some leadership capacity building within it.
Alex, how about from your perspective?
Yeah. So I want to echo the comment about the providers need to understand quality improvement. So literally, the grant might need to have a description of this is the way that our providers are learning quality improvement. Do you have a session on it? Do you make them do modules? The IHI has some phenomenal modules on this, and you can access them at most academic medical centers completely for free. So that's a great opportunity. The second thing is to try to make some of the measurements meaningful and move beyond just surveys and actual patient outcome data, if that is possible. So, for example, in diabetics, are you actually measuring hemoglobin A1Cs, which we know actually have a direct impact on rate of needs for dialysis, future heart attacks, et cetera, et cetera. The third point, which is an interesting point, and I'm going to go out on a limb here. Should this be put into a grant request? But I'll tell you, I've been a QI guy for a while now, and I love it. But culture eats quality improvement for lunch. Okay, so you have to describe something about how your culture really embraces QI, because if they don't, it's dead in the water. You can have the most phenomenal educational intervention, and if your culture doesn't buy into it, it's going to be dead before it even starts. So to really describe how does our culture, how is quality improvement embedded within our culture, within our institution, or within the people that are involved in the grant that's being written.
It's a great point, because I think one of the things that is critical to this is the sustainability of the change or that transformation that's taking place as a result of any of these initiatives. And what we've seen is if a culture of quality does not exist in that institution, or in that system, if it's not a priority, any of that transformation, any of those gains that are made ultimately fall off a cliff as soon as everyone goes home and the lights are turned off, right? And so one of the things that we always recommend in grant requests is that there be some language around the sustainability piece of it. How will the changes be sustained? How will this culture continue to support support that change so that these outcomes can be realized. So I think that's a great point. Scott, did you have a question that you wanted to tee up?
Yeah, so there's a question that just came over the MedPage Today text line. So, and this is probably reflective of how some of us are still licking our wounds over PI. So what are some examples of QI CME that are not PI?
I'm gonna pivot to Kathleen on that, since you're, let's just say, more experienced.
Well, I don't know about that. Maybe I have more wounds I've licked over time. That's really what this is all about. So thanks for that analogy. One of the key differences is that quality improvement is at a systems level, whereas performance improvement tends to dig down to the granular level, to a specific practitioner in his or her outcomes with their patients. So that is one important thing, and that really is a beautiful segue from what we just were all talking about, that we have to look at the culture of an organization. So whoever is that cohort pool that you're trying to reach, what is the culture within that organization? So that's one key difference. And then the other thing is we've kind of forgotten to talk about the patient in all this, and certainly that's a big part. The patient's a big part of a quality improvement project, unlike a performance improvement project. In a quality improvement project, hopefully the patient's at the table and we are involving the patient as part of the team, and the patient has a voice.
If I could jump in just a second, Scott.
Yes.
One of the prime differences as well, in addition to what Kathleen just suggested, I've always found that performance improvement CME was focused much more on a project, whereas quality improvement education is really a way of developing the educational industry, or evolution of the educational industry. It is going to be the future. Quality, the focus in the system, the focus on the patient, the focus on the interprofessional collaboration and how the interprofessional team are learning, as all of the panelists have said today, is really where we are moving. Whereas the performance improvement education was really focused on more of a how do we enhance level 5 outcomes, for example, on the Moore's Pier.
And John, to that point, I think one of the things that we're seeing, again, as we all try to figure out, the lexicon and all the terminology and have standard, terms and definitions for this. But yes, Kathleen, it's systems-based, and QI is systems-based, and PI is individually based. But what we're finding is that the performance at the individual level, if we are focused on that individual's performance, in aggregate is driving up to the overall quality improvement. And so the fear that I think, because the PI experience, created lots of discussion and challenges, my fear is that we are going to move away from that concept of individual performance improvement, which I think is absolutely critical in order to get system-wide change and quality intervention. So I do think that the two are going to go hand in hand, but I do think we made the mistake of looking at them as two separate entities when we should have been looking at them as one collective step forward. Alex, did you have anything, or Catherine, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I want to add to this. I think it's important. Look at the way that physicians have responded to the American Board of Medical Specialties, the 24 boards, in terms of their MOC. So there's a plethora and community of people right now that are really upset with it. But the boards are taking a very interesting look at this, and it's not about the person, the individual project. When a physician, for example, has to do their recertification, or I should say, it's not recertification, it's maintenance of certification. It's in the word. What they have to do, they have to do a project, and so there are preloaded projects or modules that are on the website for each of the boards, and they actually had to be quote unquote pigeonholed into each of those projects. And that's fine, but there was no, that's not much of a culture right there, that you have to do a project just to get points so that you can continue to practice medicine. That didn't make a lot of sense. So the multi-specialty portfolio program that exists right now is phenomenal, because it's taking people from different specialties and saying, hey, let's work together. If we're going to do a project to reduce central line infections, that might involve infectious diseases physicians and surgeons and ICU docs all at the same time. That's wonderful, and that's a great example of them all working together. Beyond just a project for me personally that I have to do to get points to count so that I can continue to practice. So I really like the approach that the boards are taking to really make it multi-specialty. I think that's really the way to go.
That's great. Scott, I want to check in with you. We're doing on time. Catherine, go ahead, please. Go ahead, Catherine.
Really quickly, that I think it's interesting for us all to think about the different models that we can use when we're thinking about quality improvement education. And I think the classic PICME model could be great for certain environments, but could not work in other environments. So I think keeping in mind that there's a big spectrum of quality improvement education and performance improvement, CME, that encompasses that very basic, that may be just a classroom learning or an online learning module about basic quality improvement education, or even more advanced concepts or reinforcing those concepts. And then also plugging in, for example, so we have, multiple 18-month-long site-based interventions that we run at a variety of different hospitals. And those, for years, have no CME attached to them. So one thing we did was we started to attach CME to the more classroom elements to it, and then the more online learning elements, so that we could start to test and look and see what those particular aspects of the larger quality improvement intervention were doing. And then at the same time, we also, for those 18-month-long interventions, applied to, this is sort of like the portfolio program, but we actually just go through the American Board of Internal Medicine, but we applied for MOC credit codes, and we don't follow any sort of traditional, 25 charts, a few education interventions, another 25 charts improvement methodology that we believe is a best practice, that we've tried and we believe is evidence-based, and we applied to the board and were able to get MOC credit for that. So that turned out to not be as quick as I thought, but I guess the end point is that we need to be flexible and really think about best practices no matter where our area of expertise is, in order to build effectiveness over time.
The two things, Catherine, that you point out that I think are really important is, number one, is around the role, again, coming back to earlier question around what is the role of continuing education in quality improvement interventions. And the way you described it is exactly it. It's a tool, it's a resource to help to drive the change, drive the transformation, and help sustain it over long periods of time. And I think, again, if our colleagues in the enterprise can be thinking in those terms, and not to say that CE in and of itself is QI, but that it is essentially the tool or resource that can make QI successful in any of these interventions. And the second thing that you said, I think, is great, because it leads into this point around expectations. The 18-month cycle, in order to deliver and measure and analyze data in a quality improvement initiative, I think is really important, because I think many of us think that this is going to happen in a 12-month cycle. We're going to have data and move on to the next grant. And so I wanted to, Kathleen, maybe you could touch on it a little bit more, following up on Catherine's comment about an 18-month cycle. What is your experience from an expectation standpoint around the time that it takes to truly realize the potential and the success of some of these interventions?
Again, another very good question, and it is tempering expectations, especially when we're reaching out to, whether it's a payer system or commercial supporter, or even at the federal level. We have found that we have to help them and to understand that if you're going to accomplish the things that you expect to see in a truly successful QI project, it's not going to be done quickly. The 18 months is pretty much, you just nailed it, Catherine, as far as I'm concerned. That's pretty much the average. About the most aggressively that we conduct QI projects is a 15-month, and I don't think we've ever done anything in under a 15-month window. So, QI has a lot of moving parts, and maybe there's some smaller projects that wouldn't look like that. I don't want to generalize, because I know that's dangerous, but as a general rule, in these larger projects that we're talking about, I think 18 months that's a good marker.
Alex, how about you, from your experience in Indiana? Any sense of time?
Right. So this is a great question, and I'm fascinated by the 18-month. Where did we come up with 18 months? It's kind of like, how long do you give antibiotics for pneumonia? Oh, 7 to 10 days sounds good to me. I mean, show me the data on the 5 days or 17 days or whatever. It's not there. Our institution is engaged in something called RIEs, or rapid improvement events, that we're trying to do to really fix a process. Okay, now these are more processes than they are outcomes, but those processes clearly lead to a lot of things with outcomes. So, why does it take so long in the ED to get a patient? Once the decision is made to admit the patient, why does it take 2 hours to get them up to the floor in the hospital? Why is that? And so, rather than looking at it over such a long period, we do this rapid improvement event when what we really try to focus on is, let's look at things, let's get the voice of the customer, we talk to the patient, someone sits with the patients in the ED to see actually how long, and they have a stopwatch with them. So it's really, really fascinating to see this. Now the problem is the measurements that we see, they end up becoming 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. I don't know if we've gone to 18 with it, but But we're really looking at some new models of how to do quality improvement in a rapid cycle process, which is a really interesting difference from the 18-month traditional thing that you guys have described.
I want to stay with the expectation side of this. Scott, did you have another question you wanted to bring in?
So this is one more question. We've got about 2 or 3 minutes, but I thought that this was a relevant question based on what Alex was just saying. So as the volume of QI programs and activities increases, how does a group or institution select and prioritize them, as well as how do they sustain the improvements that are, initially sought after in these QI initiatives?
Alex, that's really a question.
Oh my God, that you hit the nail on the head. When we first started doing quality improvement at the resident level, we had all these cool projects. Oh, that's great. Oh, that's great. And we got to do that one. That's awesome. That's a great one. And what we realized after a couple of months, you got 10 projects going. Well, a person only has so many hours in the day to do their work. If you keep adding one more project on top of it, it's like a pie. You can only put so many pieces of fruit into the pie before the pie's going to explode. So that actually is going to hurt sustainability. So you've got to find what I call the quote-unquote sweet spot between the maximum number of projects which are going to gain some improvement and not completely overwhelming them that people are going to actually say, QI, enough of that, I'm done with it, it's all bad. So you got to find that sweet spot, and there's no right answer to what it is. So my answer is there is no right answer, but I'm curious what others think.
Catherine, any final comments from you on this?
Yeah, just a quick, so from the more professional society perspective, so because we're not in a site and we assess things obviously completely different than a site, we're looking at a bunch of different hospitals in our case, community and academic, all of whom have different priorities and different motivation related to those priorities. So we actually have started to follow a needs assessment process. We actually prioritize in a lot of different ways, as you can imagine. I'm going to highlight one. But the way that a lot of people do CME. So we do a regular survey to our members about their training and quality improvement needs. So that includes CME and then also quality improvement. That's one of the ways that we are able to prioritize and select topics so that we're not dictated just by an RFP or something of interest or the additional piece of fruit in the pie.
So listen, I want to wrap up because we're at the end of our time here. So I want to ask each of you for one recommendation that you can make to all of the stakeholders in the CE enterprise right now as people are thinking of QI, implementing QI, tracking QI, measuring and analyzing that data. From your experience and your expertise, one recommendation that we should keep in mind as we head down this path. Alex, I'll start with you.
Sure. My take-home message would be QI is a pool. Jump on in. The water's warm. Have a great time.
Catherine, how about you?
I would say from the professional society perspective, get up, walk out of your office, and walk into the office of your QI or CME colleague. Quiet your brain and try to listen to their language and see if their language is actually interesting to you, even if you didn't understand it at the beginning.
Thank you. Kathleen, final comments?
Find a way to connect to the patient. The patient in all of this, if we can plan the most elaborate QI project there is, but the patient's not going to buy into it or doesn't understand what QI is or what their role is, I fear that nothing's going to be sustainable over time. The patient's an incredible part of this process.
I appreciate it. So Alex, Catherine, Kathleen, thank you again for taking the time to do this. Thanks to John Ruggiero and Genentech for their support of this initiative. Scott, I'm going to turn it back to you. Just a final comment from my end is thank everybody for participating and watching this today. I am optimistic and feel, as I said at the very beginning, very passionate about the direction that we're going with the work we're doing in quality improvement education. And I believe if you open the newspaper and watch the news, you will see every single day in real time where we can make a difference. You can read today's paper, and there are plenty of stories where quality improvement education could be developed and implemented ultimately to improve patient care. And I think that's our opportunity, and I think it's a profound opportunity that we have facing us. So again, thanks everyone for joining today, to my panelists, and to Derek and Scott for CME Palooza. Hope you guys have a great rest of the week.
All right, thanks so much, Scott. Just a few quick housekeeping items. So for folks who have not yet gone in and completed the participation survey, there is a link at the top of the live tab that'll help us get a sense of who is watching CME Palooza Fall. And so certainly we encourage everyone to fill this out. And for folks who are going to be watching the next broadcast, please refresh your browser here in a couple minutes, and we'll be starting up again right here at, I guess it's 1 o'clock Eastern Time. So thank you all to our panelists once again, and hopefully we'll see everybody else soon.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.